And so God himself has walked in your shoes. And you won't hear from God or even be able to receive from God till you see that. He can get stuff to you, but I'm talking about a stability that will permeate your being as you walk in this earth. And so he's busy trying to show you he has walked in your shoes. He does understand, and he does not despise you for your weakness. He does not despise you for the things you've done because of the fear of death. He doesn't despise you for wanting life. He doesn't despise you for trying to come down off the cross. And that's really what it is. The sin that so easily besets all of us is wanting to come down off the cross. And when we try to come down off the cross, which is we try to enlist our own hand to perfect our lives from death, do you know what comes out of that place? The fruit of death, the works of the flesh. And so God doesn't judge us for the works of the flesh. He sees what's really going on is we're coming down off the cross. He sees that we're not able to just be at rest while we're being nailed to a tree. He doesn't despise you for trying to get down when the world is crucifying you guys. Why do you think he came into the world and let the world crucify him? And so just ask yourself for a second, do you think God despises you for trying to come down off the cross? Or do you think it makes sense to him why you would want to do that? You think he didn't hear the voice telling him to come down off the cross to prove who he was? You think he didn't feel the weakness in his body? You think he didn't feel all that? So do you think he understands? Or do you think he judges you? I mean, God never created you to experience death. And you know what else God knows? This will mess people up. But God knows you don't have the ability to resist death in the flesh. He knows he's the only one who possesses the strength to resist sin and death in the flesh. He doesn't expect you to be able to stay up on the cross. Why do you think he came and got up on the cross? If he thought you could stay up on the cross, he would have just told you, stay on the cross. And so he knows that he's the only one who can resist sin and death in the flesh. So do you know what he does? He draws us to himself. And do you know how he draws us to himself? He shows us that he's full of compassion for us when we're beset with sin. And the way he does that is by showing us he's felt the same thing. He knows. And what that does is it draws us to himself. He shows us his hands. He shows us the nail marks in his hands. He shows us the piercing in his side. And he looks us in the eyes in that place. And you know what he says to us? Me too. I know. I know that feeling of the cross is evil. I know that feeling of death. And you see the compassion in my eyes right now? That's what we see in his eyes when he shows us that he knows and that he himself has felt that. And what happens is that brings us close to him, right? Because we see that there's like comfort, there's understanding, there's compassion, there's a big gigantic hug in this guy's presence. And when we get there, there's grace for us in our time of need. There's strength. And I promise you, you're not coming to someone if you don't think they're intimately acquainted with what hurts you. That's when you're off isolated in the corner by yourself. Because you don't think you're getting a warm embrace. You think you're getting worldly chastisement. Right? Does that make any sense? You guys following that? Maybe all you guys aren't like this, but just to give you a personal example, in the past, I despised myself for weakness. And that's one of the things that kept me from coming to God. I thought that the weakness was a sign that something was wrong with me and that something was wrong with God. Well, if something's wrong with me and something's wrong with God, those are the only two people in the room. And so I ain't coming to him, and I am not at peace with myself. And if you ain't at peace with yourself and you don't think he's at peace with what you're going through, you ain't coming to him. And so that left me isolated and alone. because I despise myself for this feeling of weakness. I thought the weakness was a sign God was far from me, because I assumed that God could never feel this weakness. And so if I feel this weakness, it must mean He isn't here. And if He isn't here, we know He could be anywhere. And if He isn't here, that must mean He's despising me for this weakness also. And then I would feel isolated and alone. Right? But listen, there's grace for you. There was grace for me. There's grace for us in identifying with God in our weakness. If you can see yourself in the face of Almighty God when you're beset with weakness, and you could see He's felt the same thing that you're feeling, listen, man, what happens is it's like a sharp two-edged sword, and it discerns your hearts, and it tells you that the weakness you're feeling is not a sign God is far from you. It's not a sign that life is far from you. It's not a sign that your life is being overcome. Do you know what it's a sign of? Death isn't right. And you feel it. That's the weakness this body feels. It's that death isn't right, and this body feels that it isn't right. And when it comes upon this body, we feel it's not right. That's the weakness that comes. Well, there's strength in a life that overcomes death in the flesh. But you ain't coming to the guy who has a life that overcomes death in the flesh. If you don't see, He knows. And you don't see He's intimately acquainted with that weakness you feel. And that He doesn't despise you, but that He's a compassionate high priest. That's when you come running up into Daddy's lap. Abba! Like Jesus. Jesus said, and don't suffer the children not to come sit in my lap. The children were coming to get in Jesus' lap. Jesus is God. When Jesus was showing us the Son of Man on the cross, when He cried out, Abba, do you know what He did? He became as a little child. He didn't take thought of His own life, but He saw the Father took thought of His life, and that was Jesus running and jumping in the lap of Abba. Why? Because He saw compassion.